Hey, this is Meredith Elliott Powell, and you know what time it is. Time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage. I got a great guest for you today. We're going to talk about no BS, and I can't think of anything better to bust through uncertainty than to talk about no BS. Walker McKay is here with me today, and a little backstory here is it has taken us months to get this
Crazy.
going. Far more my fault than yours, Walker. But we both got in here by the skin of our teeth and are ready to have a great conversation about really what I want to focus on is really the shifting marketplace and what it takes to open doors, close sales, all those great things. Sales guru, author of the No BS sales system. Now, Walker, just a little bit of background for you. I found you because I listened to you on a couple of other podcasts. I just love what you talked about, what you focused on. But for those that are listening that don't know you, give us the Walker McKay story. And I mean, tell us how you even got into sales in the first place.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably like a lot of people, I got into it accidentally or for the wrong reasons. When I was just out of college, I went to work for a bank and I was told that I should be in sales or business development because I could talk to anybody and I had thousands of friends, which are, as you probably know, two of the worst reasons to go in sales, right? Because sales is not about talking to anybody and it's certainly not about making friends if you're doing it right. You'll be sadly disappointed. Most of your prospects don't need more friends anyway. But I got into that, and then I was at the bank for about 18 months, and I was tired of that. I was going to more of a full-time sales role, so I went into commercial real estate at age 22. I was there in brokerage. I was in that business for about 11 years. It almost killed me just because I was wildly unprepared for any kind of the sales or the difficulties of that business. I just was I was an excuse-making mess, shall we say. And that's something that I can talk about later. I finally ended up hiring a sales coach that at the time I didn't need. And this guy showed me that not only was I an excuse maker and that I talked too much, but he helped me answer a question that I had been trying to figure out for a long time. Everybody that I had been around, every sales book I read, everything said, you got to ask the right questions. You got to ask the right questions. And I never could figure out what the right questions were. And that always bothered me. I couldn't figure out I never saw any consistency in what other people were doing. And I came up, all of a sudden I realized after pondering that for about 10 years that that's the wrong question. The question I should be asking myself is, what is it that I'm looking for? What am I trying to learn to see if somebody would be a good prospect for me, right? What are those things I need to know about them that would make them be a good prospect for me? And I realized it had to be deeper than data. It had to be more than how many, how much. But we needed to find out from people, what are their opinions about their situation? What do they think about the situation they were in? And if they thought that was a problem, then I needed to dig deeper and see if that was a problem they were committed to fix. So that's helped me in, a number of careers, but certainly in my, I stayed in the commercial real estate consulting business for a while. And then that coach asked me to come work with him. He said, You've got a good entrepreneurial mind. We're going to grow this business, blah, blah, blah. And so I went to work with him and we had great success for about 10 years. And then I let that relationship go. We didn't jive on a lot of things. We saw the world different ways towards the end. And I just, long story again, I got called out on making excuses and I realized that, it was time for me to move on. So I had a 3-year non-compete. I was an outsourced VP of sales for fractional, like for 4 or 5 different companies. That was an awful business model. I just was terrible. I sucked. I wasn't good at it. And the business model sucked. And so finally I got back into training and I had a million excuses there too. I didn't have any money for a classroom. And my buddy said, well, we got this thing called Zoom. It was 6 years ago and nobody knew what that was.
Wow.
And I said, I don't have any of my own material. He said, well, you can come up with that. So I did. And then anyway, he just called me out on all my excuses again. I was like, well, hell yeah, let's go. And he said, what do you want to call it? And I said, well, I've been giving you a bunch of BS. So why don't we call it No BS Sales? And I had to explain to my mother that stood for no bad salespeople. But the rest of y'all may have a different interpretation of that.
Yeah, exactly. That one makes our mothers happy. I love the fact that you said to find a prospect, it needs to be deeper than data, because I got to tell you, I find that the biggest place that I see sales professionals waste time is chasing the wrong
Oof.
prospect,
Yes.
because we build this ideal prospect profile, right? Which is all based on data. They're a certain age, they're in a certain industry, decision makers at a certain level, those types of things. But talk a little bit more about that. I mean, when you work with an organization, you're trying to flush out a
Yeah.
prospect.
Yeah.
How do you dig deeper? What do you do?
It's a great question. And so, yeah, you're right. We can look and say, well, if you sell life insurance, for example, you say, this is a 35-year-old guy. He's got new children. He's got a mortgage he's a perfect prospect for me. And then you hunt him down to try and kill him. And the problem with that theory is it's not just the data. It's what are the things that they're saying to make them a good prospect for you. Right. So, and not that people walk around with their problems on their forehead,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to dig in and find out, just because we think they'd be a good candidate for life insurance, why would they think they'd be a good candidate for life insurance? For example, we may have to ask, hey, listen, when you thought about what happens to your family, if you got hurt or you were, killed, what'd you come up with? And then they say, well, I don't really know. Or, you know what? I've got a $10 million liquid net worth, or I've got family money that can cover my family. I don't need a life insurance policy, right? So everybody's got their own situation, how they've walked to this point. And just because we think we know what could fix somebody doesn't mean that that's the idea that they're going to think is the right one. Can I take a quick story on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a friend who has a family. He'd lived in his house about 2 years. One night, about 2:00 in the morning, fire alarm goes off. He gets up, gets his family out get them out the house. As he's going down the stairs to get out, he dials 911. The fire trucks show up 25 minutes later. They dump 1 billion gallons of water on his house. He spends the next 3 years fighting with the insurance company over who's going to pay for what in the repairs. It was a disaster for him.
Right.
He said, if this ever happens again, I'm going to get my family out. I'm going to walk 2.5 miles to your house. We're going to have 2 drinks, and then I'm going to call 911. I want that somebody to burn to the ground. Now, that would not make sense to anybody unless they'd been through his experience, right? So it's our job to figure out, not only do they have if they share a problem, what do they think about that problem? What have they tried to do about that problem? How much is that problem costing them? Is that a big deal? What happens if they do nothing? All these are things that we need to help our prospect think through. And if they say, it ain't no big deal, then we say, sounds great. I don't need to waste your time. And that's one of the things too, if I can share that, Meridith, one of the things that salespeople do that I think makes us look bad is they use the words my time in their conversations. What I tell my clients is I want you to ban the words my time from your vocabulary forever. Because if you say, I don't want to waste my time, you sound like a jackass. But if you say, look, I don't want to waste your time, all of a sudden it sounds right. And some people say, well, I say I don't want to waste your time or my time. Don't say my time. You sound like a jackass.
Yeah.
So have a conversation and say, look, I don't feel any pressure to sell you anything. I don't know if what I have would help you or you'd even need it. And be honest about that.
Yeah, such great points. What do you think really in today's marketplace? I mean, you mentioned that you got into Zoom long before any of the rest of us really ever heard into it. But we've come through COVID, we've come through last year, which for a lot of organizations was just a boom year, combined with the fact that we'd all figured out how to navigate this new world, with the fact that things were opening up. So people were grateful to be, back at it. Now we're kind of in this, gosh, who knows what's going to happen in today's marketplace. And we're feeling the sales cycle tighten a bit. Where are you seeing some of the biggest challenges and frustrations in the marketplace?
I think a lot of it is a great question, Meridith. I think that a lot of this, when we first went into COVID, a lot of people had rules. They would say like, well, listen, my clients would never buy over video. because my clients are old. They would never do that. Or this just won't work, or there's no way we can sell if. And so then we kind of walked them through that, and they realized that they're, if they have their wealth financial planner and they've got old people, they're talking to their grandkids on FaceTime all the time. For God's sake, they can use video, right? Mm-hmm. And then we get into the next phase, which was we can't get product because we can't get that stuff shipped over. They're long lead times. We're not going to be able to sell anything. And then we figured out people would buy it. And so now we're getting into this thing where interest rate environment and financial topsy-turvy, and we say people just can't make decisions in an environment like this. It's all bullshit, right? Yeah. What we need to be doing, if we're not doing it solidly right now, you're going to get killed. You need to be prospecting every single day. Pick up the phone, call people, find out about their business, what's going on, what's working, what's not, how can you help them if they even want help. What I found is, and I went through this, was on the wrong side of this in last century, as my kids like to remind me. In 1990, when I was calling in commercial real estate, we were in an awful recession. And my buddies and I would just say, well, nobody's buying anything anyway. So we would leave the office at 3:00, go drink beer. Friday afternoons, we go watch a movie. And believe it or not, nobody bought from us, right? And yet there were 3 guys in my office of 20, and they sat in their office. They walk in, wouldn't talk to us because we were whining and complaining. They go in and they'd shut the door and make calls. And those 3 guys had the best year they'd had in 10 because they worked and they figured out how to make it work. So a full pipeline solves a lot of problems. And and realize that no matter what you do, I say that, I'm sure there's somewhere that would not say this, but somebody in your business is going to figure out how to make a lot of money right now. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to put in the work to figure that out? And instead of saying, in this bad economy, this will never work, some of my favorite words are, I haven't figured out how to yet. I hadn't figured out how to make a lot of money in this crazy economic environment. I hadn't figured out how to get people to answer the phone or to even call me back. Because when you use those words, you're planting a seed in your brain to figure it out, as opposed to saying, they won't, it'll never. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I find the difference between really successful sales professionals and those that aren't, are that really successful professionals do the work day in and day out, whether, because the thing about sales is you just have weeks where the pipe doesn't move. Yes. I mean, just, and it can get frustrating and it can get a little bit scary, but they tend to plug and do the work day in and day out, almost like as if it's brushing their teeth, it's working out. Yep. They're just doing it consistently. And then you have those, you think they're lucky because they have these windfall months where they double their goal, but it's because in March they made so many sales calls that didn't move at that point, but they just established those behaviors. I read a statistic in Gallup that I forget the statistic. I wrote a blog on it. I should remember the high percentage, and it's a high percentage of sales professionals who do not hit their goals on an annual basis. It's really big. And I'm amazed at a couple of things around that. Number one, why? Number two, why is that? Why is underperformance accepted in sales, do you think?
Well, I think when we talk about goals, I think about whose goals are they? And so is it the company that said, every year we're going to raise your goal 20%? Or is it somebody's personal goals where they sit down and say, gosh, if I could make another $50,000, $100,000, then I could do this thing that I've been dreaming of doing for me or my family, right? Something, that way. I think sales is probably not considered by many to be a profession. I think it's a lot of people get into sales like I did, or they say, oh, it takes to get into sales. You get a business card with your name on it and you're in sales, or hell, anymore, all you need is a LinkedIn page, right?
Right.
And so it's probably accepted because a lot of the people that manage it think, well, I couldn't do this either. Or you give people 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 chances because you don't want to hurt them by letting them go. And the reality is you're probably keeping them from going where they ought to be. That's the problem. You're not shooting them. You're letting them go. You're making them available to industry to go find the level they need to be. I don't understand lack of performance, especially over a long period of time, because it gives a message to the rest of your team. We don't really care how you do. We don't believe the stuff we tell you. Is
Yeah,
that what you think? What do you think?
I think it is exactly what you said in that the person who is leading you can't do what you do and is afraid to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Years ago, when I was in banking in sales as well, and I'll never forget, I couldn't get something through centralized underwriting. I was really frustrated. It was about 6 o'clock at night, and I just hung up the phone yelling at centralized underwriting because that's how unprofessional I was at the time.
I'm familiar. Yeah, me
And
too.
while I was in a different region of the bank, but our mortgage headquarters were located in our facility. And the executive vice president of mortgage walked into my office and said, "What are you so upset about? We're the only two still there at 6." And I explained to him what I was mad about. And he said, "Pick up that phone and call back and push harder." And I said, "Why?" And he said, because he said, "You're going to win. Everybody in this company, you are more powerful than because you hit your sales goals. And
Aha.
they just give you a hard time because they're terrified they're going to have to do what you do and they don't have the ability to do it." And I have
Fascinating.
never forgotten that. And, I just thought, and I do think there's a lot of people who lead in sales who got out of direct selling because they couldn't necessarily consistently close the sales, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you are led by somebody who isn't more effective than you in the process, because I think a lot of salespeople don't hit their sales goals because they're doing something wrong and they don't know what that is. They're
Right.
choosing the wrong prospect. They're not using the networking to get it right. They're not having the right sales conversation. They don't know how to transition to the close. They don't know. I just did a session for a company on how to position yourself differently in the marketplace, and they really didn't know how to do it. And so I really think like most salespeople don't close can't hit their goal because they don't understand what's wrong in the process and they're being led by somebody who can't help them identify that.
I agree with you. And I think most sales training for companies, it turns out to be product training.
Yeah.
And, that's not selling. It is not product training. Features, benefits is not freaking selling. And we got to realize that sales training should not be taught by marketing who wants you to know what all the products are.
Right.
Good sales training is how do you build trust with somebody quickly? How do you understand what they're going through? And then are they willing to trust you enough to give you money to make that personal problem go away?
Yeah.
Do they trust you enough to give you money, make the problem go, which has nothing to do with your product or service? I got to tell you, and we'll never differentiate ourselves by our product or service. If they can't tell you're different yourself, they'll never see you as being better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've long told people that I always felt that I was the most effective salesperson in the first 90 days I started with a company because I was so ignorant about the products. All I could do was ask questions and listen, and all I would do was just take notes. And I would come back to somebody like you and say, "I had this great call with so-and-so. Here's everything I learned. What do I offer them?" And I would find it was just a multitude of products I could offer because I could never interrupt them and never offer a product because I had no idea what I was selling.
That's something that is such a truth and that most people don't believe. And you're absolutely right. The more you learn, there's this that they call it a dummy curve, right? So the less you know about the product to start with, the more questions you'll ask. Then when you learn all about the product, you spend more time blabbing about the product, which makes you very ineffective. And when you finally become a professional, you're effective up here again because then it's all about the prospect and not about your product.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned picking up the telephone. So in this world of text, in this world of email, in this world of telephones, in this world of, getting somebody on a screen, what are you telling? I mean, what do you think salespeople need to be proficient in, and where does reputation build get into this? That was a big question. Sorry for that.
So I think we ought to use all means necessary to get in touch with people. There's an old saw. I don't know if it's true or not, but it often takes 12 touches, 12 times they've seen your information or heard your name or heard your voice for somebody to even know you're alive. And so I tell people, this is a great device. It's not just for looking at Twitter. It's not just for taking pictures. This thing is actually a perfectly great tool to reach people you can't reach otherwise. And you can be better at it and worse at it. But before you focus on better or worse, focus on using the damn thing.
Yeah.
Somebody who's got great skills who never picks up the phone is a loser, right? And the guy that doesn't have any skills but picks up the phone will find business. It just will happen. I believe that needs to happen. I think texting has its place as a follow-up. I think direct messages through LinkedIn are important. If you use that, I feel like networking is good. Asking for referrals are good. But I think we need to be working on at least 3 or 4 of those things at any given time to grow your business. I think relying on one is gonna set you back.
What do you think that sales professionals need to be doing today in the face of, positioning themselves as an expert, so to speak?
That's great.
Or
Yeah. So a lot of things, right? You can post original content on LinkedIn. And or you can respond to people on LinkedIn who are posting and stuff. Share that thing is good. I believe that most prospecting too is about building awareness, right? Giving people context and building awareness. So the LinkedIn posts you make, the emails that you send, the conversations you're having on the phone, the networking that you're doing will build your reputation. And here's the thing. I believe that your reputation, I used to have this statement that when you start working for a business or when you're brand new, right, the business name on the business card is this big and your name is like that big. And as you've been working for longer, your name gets bigger and the company name gets smaller. Right. Not really, but that's the way it works. And so I would tell you that being known as somebody who is a great listener, being known as somebody who really understands business, being somebody who really is a go-to for lots of different kinds of information, that helps no matter what business you're in.
Yeah, I would agree.
And not, if you're known as, great sales guy, that often means, to a lot of people, means you're pushy, you're argumentative, in those ways. If you're known to the world as great sales guy, it often means that you're like Grant Cardone, but in person. Right, which is obnoxious and those kind of things. So I think a great salesperson is often not known as such. I feel like they're known as interested and somebody who is, studied what they're doing, but quite frankly is gathering more information than giving it.
Yeah, I would agree. So, it's hard to believe, but we are about to come to the end of this podcast. And I always like to close out with 2 questions. And you can answer them either one first. So obviously, how do people get a hold of you? How do they find out more about Walker McKay and about the No BS sales system? And then if you were going to give our listeners one piece of advice, one thing that they should focus on to be more successful in today's marketplace, what would that advice be?
Okay, I'm going to answer number 2 first. I have this thing on my desk. It's taped to the bottom of my computer that says, keep moving. And so no matter what happens, always keep moving. Keep making sales calls. Keep moving forward. As soon as you curl up in a ball because you're having a shitty day, or as soon as you stop, you're dead. And so I tell people, always look around and say, what do I need to do next? What are the things I can do to bring new money in the door? You will never be hurt by doing that. Number 2, a couple ways to find me. Websites, walkermckay.com. The other way that's been probably easier is to go to No BS Sales School Podcast. No BS Sales School Podcast. Or if you Google any of your podcast channels, if you Google Walker McKay, it'll come up. But No BS Sales School with Walker McKay. I post twice a week, 5 to 15 minutes, just a quick tip, something you can listen to on your way to work, your way home, way to the gym, that kind of thing.
I've listened to I listened to quite a bit of them over the weekend. Well, I love Keep Moving. I named my business Motion First for that reason. It took me a long time to come up with a name, but I thought, who am I and what am I about?
Right.
And I believe that confidence, I believe that success comes from moving forward no matter what, and especially moving forward when on those weeks with sales, it feels like you're stuck in the mud.
Yeah. Right on. Appreciate that. So, Thank you, Meredith. It's been super fun.
Yeah.
I hope you all who are listening will rate this podcast. Meredith works really hard for this, and it's a nice way to show that you care and that you're paying attention if you give her a nice review on this podcast, wherever you're listening to it.
Thanks, Walker. It has been awesome having you on here, and look forward to having you back on. And I'm glad I tell you, you can tell we're both in sales because we were as persistent as heck
Yes.
to make this happen. Never give up. We'll see you right back here again for another episode of Thrive, where together we are going to learn how to shift, feel, think, act, how we face uncertainty and turn it into our competitive advantage.